In the city that never sleeps, where neon lights shimmer and car horns echo through the bustling streets, people who seem destined never to meet can cross paths in the most unexpected ways. Richard Hale, a billionaire CEO with the world at his fingertips, had lived a life consumed by numbers and contracts. But everything changed in a fleeting moment when he collided with a little beggar girl on the street. That girl, with eyes full of hope and a story hidden behind them, would lead him on a journey he had never imagined. This is not just a tale of generosity but a journey of rediscovering what truly matters in life. And it all began on a rainy evening in the heart of New York. New York, the city that never sleeps, where the relentless pace of life never slows down. Bright neon lights illuminate towering skyscrapers, and cars screech along Fifth Avenue, a place where luxury brands and high-end boutiques are always buzzing with shoppers. Every step taken here reflects the urgency that defines this metropolis. Stories of life get lost in the sounds of honking horns, people calling to each other in cafes, and hurried footsteps on the sidewalks. Amid this chaotic cityscape, Richard Hale, one of Wall Street's most powerful CEOs, stepped out of his luxurious limousine, moving swiftly through the crowded streets. With a furrowed brow, he scanned his surroundings, uninterested in anything or anyone beyond his work. Every passing minute held value for him. Every meeting, every investment decision, and every multi-million-dollar deal was the only thing that made him feel truly alive. However, Richard's life was not always surrounded by the glitz and glamour of high society parties and luxury cars. He lived in an expensive penthouse in Manhattan, where everything was arranged exactly as he wanted. Every morning, he would sip his pricey espresso while gazing down at the city below, where people rushed about like chess pieces in a game where he was the master player. But inside, within that lavish space, loneliness loomed. He had been divorced from his ex-wife for years, and since then, work had become his everything. His relationships with those around him had faded into mere formalities. All he had were meetings, numbers, and polite thank yous from business partners, never a true sense of closeness with anyone. That evening, after a long and stressful meeting, Richard stepped out of his office building. The New York sky had turned into a dull gray, and a light drizzle had begun to fall. His polished leather shoes made a crisp clack sound against the pavement, but he paid no mind, eager to get home and unwind. Yet, luck was not on his side tonight. As he hurried across the street, a sudden, forceful collision made him stop abruptly. Richard staggered back, barely catching sight of a small girl falling before him. A tiny pushcart, filled with plastic bags and leftover food containers, tumbled onto the sidewalk. The girl, around 12 years old, had messy brown hair and a face smudged with dirt. She bit her lip as if trying to suppress the pain from the fresh wound on her arm. Long scratches marred her skin, bright red blood trickling down, but she made no sound of distress. Richard looked at the girl with clear annoyance. Irritated, he couldn't understand why, in a city like New York, where money could buy anything, someone would dare to get in his way like this. He had never wanted to stop for moments like these, as they were nothing but a nuisance. "Be careful," Richard snapped, his voice cold. The little girl got up, clutching her injured arm. Her wide eyes revealed both fear and resilience. Yet, she did not cry, did not scream, she simply looked at him intently. "I'm sorry, but could you help me, just a little?" she asked, her voice weak yet remarkably steady. Despite the dirt on her face, her eyes shone bright, filled with hope. Richard felt a wave of irritation rise within him. He was all too familiar with the homeless and beggars, always finding ways to exploit the wealth of people like him. To him, this was just another act, another cheap trick. "I don't have any spare change," Richard replied curtly before hastily walking away. Unwilling to waste his time on a stranger, but the girl did not give up. She slowly stood up and shook her head gently. "I don't need money," she said, her eyes filled with worry but devoid of complaint. "I just need a little help. I have 10 younger siblings waiting for me at home." Richard froze. 10 siblings. This frail child was responsible for an entire family. It felt like a slap to his logic. In that moment, the city's noise seemed to fade. The neon lights glimmering on the towering skyscrapers blurred, and Richard couldn't ignore her words. But what truly unsettled him was not just her story, it was her eyes. That resilience, that hope, despite the harsh reality surrounding her. He recalled the countless lonely nights in his penthouse, where no one was there to share anything with him. Was his life, filled with wealth and power, missing the very things that others cherished the most? An unfamiliar sense of unease twisted inside him, leaving him standing still for a long moment. Something inside him had changed. As he turned to leave, he realized he couldn't just walk away. His polished shoes hesitated on the damp sidewalk, and in the girl's eyes, he saw something deeply familiar, something profoundly human, something he had long forgotten. Richard stood still for a long moment, gazing up at the towering skyscrapers in the distance. At first, he had thought it was just a small accident, a minor collision that went unnoticed in the bustling crowd of New York. But as his gaze swept over the face of the little girl, a turmoil that he couldn't explain stirred inside him. It was as if there was something he had never noticed before, a feeling he had never experienced in 1,000 meetings or the millions of contracts he had signed. The little girl in front of him was named Emma, a child with nothing but a tattered outfit, a small cart, and bags full of leftover food she had gathered from restaurants and garbage bins in the city. She had clear, bright eyes, but they also carried the weight of worries that only someone in her circumstances could truly understand. Emma had lived on the streets of New York for 12 years, ever since she was a baby abandoned outside a hospital. She didn't know who her parents were, nor had she ever known what it felt like to have a warm family. All she remembered were the long nights spent curled up in the dark corners of the streets, with the dim streetlights casting reflections on the cardboard she used as her bed. But Emma was never alone. Beside her were 10 other children, all orphans, living together with her as a family without parents. Even though she was only 12 years old, Emma had learned to be a mother, a big sister to the other children. Every day, she had to walk through dark alleys and the poorest areas of the city to find food, collect old clothes, and gather anything that could be reused. Sometimes she had to help clean windows at shops or retrieve items for customers to earn a few coins, but it was all just to ensure that she and her younger siblings could have something to eat the next day. Emma never accepted this life of poverty, but she never surrendered either. She always dreamed of a day when her younger siblings wouldn't have to suffer hunger or live in abandoned buildings anymore. She dreamed of a warm home, where there was enough food and care for all the children under her care. When the little girl faced Richard, it wasn't the first time she had struggled to find help. She had encountered wealthy people, philanthropists who passed by without even noticing her. She had also met those who wanted to exploit her poverty to take the little money she had. But Richard was different. His gaze made her feel something she had never felt before: concern, hesitation, as if he wanted to do something good, but didn't know where to begin. "How can I help you?" Richard finally spoke, his voice softened, no longer holding the irritation it had earlier. Emma didn't know what to say. She just knew that without help, Her siblings might not survive through the night. One of them was seriously ill, and she didn't have enough money or the means to take them to the hospital. She could only pray that something would change, that someone would come to help. "I just need a little help, sir. All 10 of my siblings are living in an abandoned building in the Bronx, and one of them is seriously ill. I don't know what to do anymore," Emma said, her voice filled with fear, yet still maintaining an incredible strength. Richard looked at the little girl for a moment. His mind spun, trying to make sense of the situation. Though he had millions of ways to solve this problem, he couldn't understand why a child should bear such a heavy responsibility. Growing up in a family filled with love and care was something he took for granted. But Emma, despite being only 12 years old, had to face a far more cruel world. "Take me there," Richard finally said, his eyes shining with determination that he himself didn't understand. "I will help you." Emma was stunned, unable to believe what she had just heard. Richard should have ignored her, dismissing her as a nuisance not worth his attention. But instead, he promised to help. It felt as if a new door had opened in her life, where there wasn't just darkness, but also a light of hope. They walked together in the rain, Richard feeling each step on the cold sidewalk. Surely, this encounter would not only change Emma's life but would change his as well. When Richard's car stopped in front of the Bronx, where Emma led him, he was taken aback by the abandoned houses, the damp, dark streets. This was a part of New York he had never set foot in, an area he had always avoided. Emma led him into the old building, where the children were waiting. A few of them were lying on cardboard sheets, their tired faces still smiling when they saw Emma return. One of them, a boy about 8 years old, had his head resting on his hands, his body burning with fever. Richard sensed the tension in the air. He saw these children not as invisible beings in his life, but as real human beings. They all had names, stories, and dreams. And at that moment, he understood that what he had in his life, wealth, power, were fragile things that couldn't compare to the love and sacrifice Emma had for her siblings. "We need to take this boy to the hospital immediately," Richard said decisively. And from that moment, his life would never be the same. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue the program, we kindly ask you to leave a comment and share your thoughts in the comments section. If you find this program meaningful, feel free to share it to support the channel and spread the value to those around you. We hope you have a truly meaningful time listening. The Bronx at night still carried a heavy chill in the air. Richard stood by the window of the luxury car, looking out at the empty streets, where only a few shadows passed by, their faces showing signs of exhaustion. Had he ever set foot in this area? Perhaps just a few hasty passes when he had business to attend to, but he had never truly seen it. The Bronx, where children like Emma had to grow up in poverty and deprivation, was a world completely different from his own life of luxury. Inside the car, Emma sat silently, her eyes constantly looking out the window. She didn't say a word, but Richard could feel the anxiety in her every breath. She was worried about the future, about her siblings, and whether things could ever change. But what mattered was that she dared to hope, dared to believe that there could be someone beyond these cold walls who would help them. After a long drive, the car stopped in front of a large hospital in the heart of the city. Richard quickly stepped out, went around to the back of the car, and opened the door for Emma. "We're here," he said, his voice deep and reassuring, as though trying to calm her. Emma looked around, and for the first time in her life, she felt a strange sensation. The hospital, with its bright lights and doctors and nurses rushing about, was nothing like the shabby hospitals she had heard of. She had never dared to dream of taking her sick sibling to a place like this. For her, it seemed too far out of reach. "This girl needs immediate care," Richard said to the doctor nearby. "Take her in right now and do everything you can." The doctors and nurses immediately sprang into action. Emma was taken into an emergency room, while Richard stood outside, anxiously waiting. In his mind, one question kept swirling: had he done the right thing? Could he really help? But when he looked into Emma's eyes, he knew he couldn't turn back. Inside the emergency room, the doctors quickly assessed the child's condition. The boy had a high fever, his body pale, but fortunately, the illness wasn't too dangerous. He just needed timely care and the right treatment. Richard stood outside, observing everything. The worry and anxiety in his heart still lingering. He understood that helping a child could be easy, but changing the life of a family, a group of orphan children, was a much greater challenge. An hour later, the doctor came out, announcing that the boy's condition had stabilized. Although he would need time to recover, the boy was no longer in danger. Richard breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew this was just the first step. "Thank you so much," Emma said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done for my little brother." Richard nodded, but inside, he felt a strange sensation. He should have felt content with helping a child. But instead, he felt like he needed to do more. This girl, along with her siblings, had made him look at his own life in an entirely different way. As Emma stepped out of the emergency room, Richard couldn't help but look into her eyes. Emma still hadn't fully shaken her anxiety. She felt like a burden, even though Richard had done everything in his power to help. But for Emma, this was just the beginning. She needed something more sustainable, not just a one-time rescue, but a real change in her life and her siblings' lives. "We need to talk," Richard said as they walked out of the hospital together. Emma looked at him, a bit surprised. "About what?" "About your future and the future of your children," Richard replied. "I want to do more to help." Emma was stunned and couldn't believe what she had just heard. She had heard many people promise to help, only to walk away. However, the determination in Richard's eyes and voice made her feel differently. She wanted to believe that this time, everything would be different. As they got into the car, Richard continued, "Emma, I know your children can't keep living in abandoned houses, they can't keep living in poverty like this. You've been incredibly strong. But you can't do it all alone. I want to give you and your siblings a new chance, a new home. I'll help you get a proper place to live, a stable job, and, most importantly, a future." Emma didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing. Richard's words felt like a dream. She couldn't imagine that she would have the opportunity to live a different life, a life she had never dared to dream of. But the sincerity in Richard's eyes made it impossible for her not to believe. As the car rolled through the streets of New York, a new feeling rose in Emma's heart. She didn't know what the future would hold, but at least she no longer had to worry about her siblings. Maybe a new life was waiting for them. Throughout that long journey, Richard didn't just feel like a helper. He realized that it was Emma and her children who had given him a lesson in sacrifice, love, and the power of hope. That day not only changed the lives of Emma and her siblings, but it also changed Richard Hale's life. He was no longer a cold CEO with millions of dollars in his hands. He had begun to realize that, no matter how much power and wealth one has, true value comes from love, care, and genuine relationships. After a week of significant changes, Emma and her siblings were moved into a new home, a home she had never dared to dream of. The house was a large building located in the suburbs of Manhattan, surrounded by lush gardens, fresh air, and schools nearby. Richard had hired a construction team to renovate the house, turning it into a true home with all the amenities for the children. Everything was new for Emma. As she stepped into the house, she felt as though she had entered a dream. The bedrooms were neatly decorated, with beds, mattresses, and toys for the younger children. She couldn't believe that it was not a dream but reality. Her children now had a real home. The dreary walls of the abandoned buildings they had lived in before were gone. Instead, there was a warm and safe space. Richard visited the house every weekend, bringing food and small gifts for the children. Emma felt a noticeable change within herself. She no longer felt afraid or worried about facing the future as she once did. Life had given her a chance to start over, and she felt grateful for that. However, the new life wasn't always easy. Despite the changes, Emma and her siblings still faced significant challenges. She had to learn how to manage a home, teach the children basic skills they had never learned before, from washing dishes to getting to school on time. Emma also started going back to school, albeit much later than usual. Although she didn't know much about reading and writing, Richard had hired a tutor to help her learn. Every evening, Emma and her siblings sat together, doing homework and learning new things. However, this process was not simple. Emma felt as if she had been placed in the middle of a whirlwind. She was used to worrying about the survival of herself and her siblings, but now, she had to face new demands she had never considered before. She didn't know how to become a real sister, someone who could take care of her siblings in this new, challenging environment. There were nights when Emma sat by the window, gazing at the distant city lights, reflecting on the decisions she had made. She knew she had been given an opportunity, but could she seize it? Could she be a good sister, a true protector for her siblings? One afternoon, when Richard came to visit, Emma decided to ask him a question she had kept in her heart for a long time. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I thank you so much for helping us. But I don't know if I can do my role well. I don't have much experience, and I'm afraid I'll mess everything up." Richard looked at her, his eyes full of understanding and empathy. "Emma, none of us are born experts. Everything takes time. What matters is that you always want to try, and that's why I believe in you." Emma looked at him, and for the first time, she felt relieved. She realized that no matter how many difficulties there were, she could still learn and grow. She was not alone anymore. Her siblings, along with Richard's support, would be the driving force that would help her overcome everything. However, things did not always go smoothly. Although Emma's siblings now had a new environment to learn and live in, they still faced some difficulties in adapting to their new life. Some of the children struggled to fit in at school, feeling alienated by the modern educational system and the environment around them. Emma had to intervene to help them, but sometimes she also felt exhausted. One day, when Emma picked up her siblings from school, she noticed that one of her younger brothers, Tommy, seemed worried and sad. She walked over to him and asked, "What's wrong, Tommy?" Tommy didn't say anything, just silently lowered his head. Emma sat down next to him and gently comforted him. "Tommy, if you're upset about something, you can talk to me." After a moment of silence, Tommy finally spoke, "The kids at school call me poor. I don't know what to do. I don't like going to school." Emma was surprised, and her heart swelled with anger. She had never imagined that the children would face such discrimination, even though they were now living in a new environment. She hugged Tommy tightly, trying to reassure him, "Tommy, no one can define your worth by what you have. What matters is your heart and what you do for the world, she continued. I understand how you feel. I've felt useless before, but I've learned something important. Every day, you can do something to change your life. And one day, everyone will see your worth. Tommy lifted his head, his eyes lighting up a little. Emma knew that, despite the challenges ahead, she and her siblings would get through it, as long as they had each other. As Emma continued to learn and grow, Richard never stopped helping her. He sent a team of psychologists to help her deal with the anxieties and stress she faced in taking care of her siblings. He also connected Emma with training programs on family management and life skills, so that she could build a solid future for herself and her younger siblings. Every time Richard visited, he brought small gifts, words of encouragement, and valuable lessons. Emma felt herself growing more and more, no longer the lost girl wandering the streets, but a sister who could take care of her family. However, despite the gradual changes, Emma knew that the road ahead would still be long. She would face many challenges and new obstacles. But she was no longer afraid. Because now, she had a family, support from Richard, and, most importantly, she had faith in herself. Months passed, and Emma felt she had entered a new phase of maturity in her life. She was no longer just a child struggling to survive on the streets of New York. Now, she had a home, a real family with her siblings. However, this new life was far from easy. Every day, she faced new challenges. She was no longer an innocent child but had become the eldest sister, responsible for the well-being of her younger siblings. In particular, managing and taking care of a family of 10 children while continuing her studies had become a significant burden for Emma. During the day, she tried to go to school, attend volunteer classes on financial management, time management, and life skills. At night, she returned to her small family, taking care of her siblings, preparing meals, cleaning, and solving any problems that arose. The hardest thing Emma faced wasn't just the physical exhaustion, but the constant worries in her heart. She couldn't stop asking herself whether she could continue her studies to secure a stable job while also taking care of her siblings. She also always worried about what would happen to them as they grew up, whether they could break free from the cycle of poverty she had lived through. One evening, while her siblings were sound asleep, Emma sat by the window, gazing out at the city, which glowed brightly under the streetlights. She sighed, unsure whether she could keep up this life. Although Richard had helped her immensely, she couldn't keep relying on him forever. She wanted to stand on her own feet. Not for herself, but for her siblings. But how could she balance studying and her responsibilities as a sister? And did she have the strength to keep going? The next day, Emma received a call from Richard. He had arranged a meeting with her at his office. At first, Emma wasn't sure what to expect, but when she walked into Richard's luxurious office, she felt his care and concern for her. Richard looked at her with a gentle gaze. Emma, I see you're struggling with a lot right now. I understand that the decisions you have to make are not easy. But you need to know that you don't have to do this alone. I will always be here to support you, but you also have to decide the path you want to take. He said. Emma remained silent, but her heart was filled with mixed emotions. Richard's words made her feel even more pressured. She wanted to find her own way, but she was scared she wasn't strong enough. Richard, I don't know if I can do it all. I don't want to just be the girl who's constantly helped. I want a different life. I want my siblings to look up to me as a role model, and I want to stand on my own. But how can I study, take care of them, and keep everything together? Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He was silent for a moment before speaking. "Emma, perhaps it's time for you to learn how to share this burden with others. I can't help you do everything, but you can find support from other organizations, from the community. And above all, you have to believe in yourself. You can become a leader, but that requires you to accept that you don't always have to do everything alone." Richard's words were like a ray of light in the darkness. Emma began to understand that she wasn't the only one facing difficulties. The community, the support from people like Richard, and charitable organizations could be tools to help her get through this phase. The next day, Emma decided to meet with other families in the neighborhood. She found ways to connect with charitable organizations that helped orphan children and families in need. Using the lessons she had learned from Richard, she started organizing meetings, exchanging ideas, and learning from others. Gradually, Emma built a support network that not only assisted her in caring for her siblings but also gave her more time to pursue her dream of education. However, the biggest decision still awaited Emma: would she continue her studies to secure a stable future, or would she quit school to care for her younger siblings and fulfill her dream of protecting them from poverty and hardship? She knew that no matter what, she would never go back to the life she once had, where she was just a child drifting on the streets. Emma knew one thing for sure: life would never be easy, but if she could take control of her own fate, she could change not only her future but also the future of the children she was caring for. Then, one day, as she watched her siblings play joyfully in their warm home, she realized that no sacrifice was ever in vain. Every step she took, no matter how difficult, had allowed other children to live a better life. After many months of struggling through hardships, Emma and her siblings' lives began to stabilize. With Richard's help, she no longer had to worry about lacking meals or makeshift housing. Her siblings were also given the opportunity to attend school and learn, although sometimes through special tutoring classes to catch up with the curriculum. Emma clearly felt that she was no longer alone on this journey. Her sacrifices were being rewarded, and the dreams she once thought were far out of reach were now becoming a reality. Richard, the man who had always been busy and indifferent to his own emotions, now saw a change within himself. His encounters with Emma and her siblings had made him reflect more on life and the true meaning of success. He realized that wealth and power could not bring happiness without sincere relationships and contributions to the community. He had learned from Emma that happiness sometimes only comes from seeing someone else's smile, and that sometimes, a small action could change a life. One day, while Emma was helping her siblings with their homework at home, Richard paid a visit. Before leaving, he had prepared a special surprise for her. He invited her and the children to a fancy restaurant, a place where Emma had only dared to look through the windows and dream about. The whole group sat around a table, with delicious food and an unusually warm atmosphere. The sense of peace and happiness filled the space. Emma couldn't believe she was sitting in such a luxurious restaurant, surrounded by people she loved. She turned to Richard, her eyes filled with emotion. "Richard, I don't know how to thank you. Everything I have today is because of you," she said, her voice trembling. Richard smiled. "Emma, I've learned so much from you. You've taught me that life isn't just about making money. You're an inspiration to me." After dinner, they walked together under the streetlights of New York, in a space Emma never imagined she would step into. The busy streets of the city kept moving, but for Emma, everything seemed to pause in that moment. Eventually, Richard stopped in front of a small park with a bench. "Emma, I think it's time for you to have a life of your own, a life that you truly deserve," Richard said, his voice calm. "You've always cared for your siblings. But you also need to live for yourself." Emma looked at him, her eyes both confused and touched. "So what should I do to repay you for all you've done for me?" Richard smiled gently, his gaze filled with warmth. "It's simple, Emma. Live the life you dream of. Become the strong woman you've always wanted to be." And then, Emma felt something new in her heart. She felt free, as though she was finally grasping her own destiny. She knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, she wasn't alone anymore. Richard and her siblings would always be there, supporting her every step of the way. The next day, Emma decided to go back to school, not just to finish her education but to explore new passions she had never thought about before. She started learning about management, finance, and even dreamed of one day starting a charity to help other orphan children like herself. And Richard continued his work, but now, he was no longer caught up in the grind of his job, forgetting the more important things in life. Every week, he visited Emma and her siblings, not just as someone helping, but as a friend, a mentor, a guide. He became a part of their lives, an essential part. In the end, the story of Emma and Richard is not just about friendship or love, but about perseverance, sacrifice, and humanity. Both of them had changed, not only in appearance or lifestyle, but in how they viewed the world around them. Their lives, though full of challenges and sorrow, were transformed because of their fateful meeting. Through it, they found each other and discovered the true meaning of life. The encounter between Richard and Emma was not just a turning point in their lives, but a testament to the power of kindness and the change that can come from small acts. After all the trials and sacrifices, they found each other and built a brighter future together. If you feel this story has touched your heart, don't forget to share it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories. Thank you for watching and supporting.